From the land of conjurers, flying through the internet to your device like a UAP, hauntingly unexplained and downright weird, this is the Witching Hours, and we are ready to take off in the flash of an eye. Good evening to one and all, wherever and whenever you are listening to this program. I am Gina the Frost, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, the medium, Jenny Lee. How are you doing, Jenny?
I think I'm okay. Cold.
Yeah, it's
real cold.
I know. And, sometimes it's like, it's not as cold as some people are, but, it's all relative.
Yeah.
So it's like, we're cold in Virginia, in our little area where we stay a little bit warmer because we're closer to the ocean. We are still cold. It got down to like 15 degrees. That's pretty chilly for us. It usually doesn't get below the teens here. So, but I know some people out there are dealing with like negative 15.
Yeah, I know.
Craziness out there. But, that's what you get for living in there. I don't know.
That's what you get for living there. It's all you people's fault that you're getting frozen nose boogers and the negative 15 degrees or whatever.
Which our son is dealing with right now. He's up in, he's getting his fair share of all that wintry wonderfulness as he's going through his training up there. So anyway, let us know in chat. What's it looking like? I know there's another snowstorm coming through Virginia tomorrow. So let us
probably
know what's
not
going
for
on
us
with the weather. Probably not for us. We always live just south of the line.
And we even moved, and it just moved. I blame it on Frosty. It's Frostjan's fault because he generates so much heat, like a body heat, like it's a furnace. It just changes the temperature. Anyway, what kind of news do we have today, Frostjan?
All right, let's get into the weird. All right, new findings from the James Webb Telescope suggest that life could have existed much earlier than previously thought. So, new findings from the James Webb Space Telescope reveal a surprising abundance of oxygen in the early universe. Researchers discovered that oxygen levels in galaxies surged within 500 to 700 million years following the universe's birth, reaching levels comparable to those in contemporary galaxies. This suggests that the essential elements of life were present much earlier than previously believed. And the article goes on, but essentially, a rapid increase in oxygen content occurred earlier than astronomers were expecting. And this opens the possibility that with necessary ingredients like oxygen already available in the early universe, life may have appeared sooner than scientists had thought. And which could make
life as we know it.
Yeah. Life as we know it, I think that's a good way of putting it, could have began much earlier, and that's saying something because we already know that other civilizations could have existed for millions and millions of years. So there we go. Story 2, astronauts heading to Mars will experience the effects of time dilation, which is one of the things that has always really intrigued me because of discussions about time travel. There really is time travel. There's people who have experienced time travel. So
what does it
when
mean
astronauts
for it to dilate, what is that?
Well, we're going to talk about that. When astronauts head to Mars, they will experience time dilation. That's to be expected. In fact, your feet and your head experience time dilation, with your head aging ever so slightly faster than your feet. But how much time dilation will they experience relative to Earth observers? So first off, let's check. The article goes in kind of explaining what's going on with time dilation. Essentially like having different clocks the closer you are to gravity. So gravity curves because of space-time. The result is that stronger gravity is near you, and the closer you are to the mass creating it, the slower time moves. Just like if you get closer to a black hole, you could essentially get to a point where time continues to move normally for you, but outside of you, time travels much further. That's what that movie was based on. What was the name of that movie again? Interstellar, I think was the name of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So from your perspective, time ran at the usual speed. This is how your foot is younger than your old, relatively speaking, head. So your head is further away from the center of gravity. Therefore, your head experiences time slightly different than your feet experience time.
I'm just letting you know that the chat is like having a fit about the feet.
We'll get there. What? So
you just make this shit up, like, oh, no,
man. It's not made up. We know this is true because when we put satellites in space, we have to put clocks that work at a different speed so that they will stay accurate.
I imagine that because you are so tall that your feet must be really young compared to your head.
Compared to my head, yeah. The taller you are, the less your head would age compared to your feet. That is true. For astronauts and cosmonauts living in zero gravity environments for long stretches, the effect is more pronounced, but effectively canceled out by speed at which the spacefarers tend to travel. So when cosmonaut Sergei Krikalev became stranded in space for 803 days, 9 hours, and 39 minutes as the Soviet Union collapsed, he technically traveled 0.02 seconds into the future, according to scientists. If astronauts are to stay on Mars for extended periods of time, then the effect of gravitational time dilation gets within the realms of noticeable. According to the Illinois physics, a human living exactly 80 years on Mars would die about 12 seconds earlier than if they lived exactly 80 years on Earth.
So it's a 12-second difference.
Over the whole 80-year span, time would move for them about 12 seconds quicker. But that's 12 seconds split out over 80 years.
12
so it's
seconds.
Like nanoseconds. Yeah.
Slower.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the closer you are to the source of gravity, the slower time moves. The further away you are, the faster it moves. That's how you can time travel using black holes. Okay. But I think that's interesting because this story just kind of reminded me of the fact that, you know, we like to talk about time travel. We haven't had a time traveler on the show yet. That's one of my goals, is to get someone who's traveled through time.
Or at least supposedly traveled through time.
And we know it's possible. It's scientifically possible. And we know it because for those reasons. So if you could create a force of gravity strong enough, then you could travel through time. So anyway, a little time travel story for today. The supersonic jet will go from London to New York in just 3.5 hours. NASA unveiled a new jet. I don't know how many of you saw that on your news streams. I saw it yesterday. It looked interesting. We have a new mode of air travel. NASA and Lockheed Martin officially unveiled a brand new X-59 supersonic last week. That's not the name of Elon Musk's newest child. It's a new aircraft model which promises to travel faster than the speed of sound, 767 miles an hour. This might be interesting. I'm sure CMC Air Boss heard about this one.
Yeah, CMC when you get in one of these airplanes.
And obliterate journey times between London and New York. The X-59 will apparently be able to get from the Big Smoke to the Big Apple in just 3.5 hours. That's not much longer than it takes to get from London to Old York. NASA's new plane has been dubbed Son of Concorde, and the agency hopes it'll revolutionize air travel before it can enter public service. However, it needs to be extensively tested in order to gauge how loud it is. Supersonic flights have been banned by the United States and a number of other nations for at least 50 years because of the ear-splitting and startling sonic booms created by planes traveling faster than the speed of sound. However, this plane has been designed with a very elongated shape. It's 100 feet long, 30 feet wide, and is hoping to circumvent sound restrictions with their innovative design. So the X-59 will be test flown across several U.S. cities to collect data about how loud it is. And if it's bearable enough to the general public, then data will be used to roll out the aircraft for a wider usage. And we could see commercial supersonic planes as soon as 2035.
Yeah. Our Australian friend, Princess Boo Boo, is saying, please make this happen.
Yeah, I know, right?
It takes forever to fly anywhere.
Yeah, yeah, 15 to 24-hour flights. I know.
Yeah.
I just had someone I know that came back from Hawaii, and it's just, 12 hours or something like that on a plane. If you've flown from the United States to Europe, it's just like, you almost waste like 4 days of whatever it is coming back and there just trying to get used to everything. But
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. There's another, that's only one. There's some other news out about some other companies that are also trying to do the same thing. So it looks like that's on the horizon again. And then the last news story I had for this evening is the cicada apocalypse returns.
Oh yeah, this one I'm not
US.
so excited. Not so excited about this one.
Returns to the United States with the first double brood emergence in 221 years.
Because we missed it by just like a few, about 100 miles. We missed the last one. So this time I think we're actually getting them. Yeah.
Periodical.
And it's a double brood.
Yeah, 2 different broods are hatching. Periodical cicadas don't emerge often, once every 13 or 17 years to be precise. And when they do arrive, they arrive in millions and even billions. This year, fate has aligned so that 2 broods will emerge from the ground, marking the first time this has happened in over 2 centuries. Brood 13 makes an appearance every 17 years, while brood 19 pops up every 13 years. This year, they're going to have to learn to share as they'll be wriggling topside together. The numbers might seem random, but there's a method to the madness. 13 years and 17 years are special because they're both prime numbers, which means it's really hard for a predator to have a cycle that syncs up with them, explained mathematician Professor Hannah Fry. Also, they almost never synchronize with each other, 13 and 17 kind of missing each other apart from every 221 years. I think the last time there's a super brood was 1803.
Wow.
So get ready for that. Did anybody have cicadas in that the last go we had a couple years ago?
Fumbi and Little Wing did, and I went to visit them, and I got to see kind of the tail end of the cicada explosion, and there were corpses everywhere you went, and there's a few still lingering, so it'll be interesting.
Well, I know this one's going to be hitting the Midwest, kind of the Midwest there. It's going to be hitting Michigan and Illinois and Indiana and down through Kentucky and then North Carolina and some parts of Virginia. It's going to be kind of spread out all over the place. So we'll have fun with that in 2024. And that was the weird news. All right. So let's introduce our guest this evening. Jaxon Schelhaas always has been intrigued with the dark, whether it's through films or books or even nature. He grew up loving fantasy and general, especially with J.R.R. Tolkien's works. There were plenty of dark elements that got him interested in dark figures of literature. Many years later, Jaxon delved into horror movies, but more specifically the ones of paranormal nature like ghosts, spirits, and possessions. He is still fascinated by stories of the macabre, mysterious, and altogether grim. He hosts Exploring Arda, a Tolkien-centered podcast where he reads through Tolkien's books apart from Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Another podcast is called Drink and Dried, where he and a friend cover lots of nerdy topics through films, books, and D&D related talks. And finally, he is the author of The Lands of Ordia, Power of Heaven, which is available on Amazon. Welcome to the show, Jaxon.
Thank you very much. I'm just really excited to be back. So,
yes, for those of you who didn't realize, Jaxon was on our Halloween special. He came and shared the very creepy story of the scary, like ring-looking girl that was getting closer and closer. And then, if you guys remember the Halloween, if you didn't see it, we might talk about it a little bit tonight.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I think if anything came from that story that we had on the Halloween special, it's that I'm a little more intrigued by sleep paralysis now and a little bit more put in unease by it.
Yeah, definitely.
Have you had any other thoughts about that since we talked to you last, Jaxon?
Yeah. Yeah, so like I remember, I think it was you, Jenny, who told me that it was probably not whatever. Because I remember at the end of the story, I get like shoved off the bed or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and you said it probably wasn't that entity, but it was something else, like a guardian spirit. And
Yes.
I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that would make more sense because it kind of broke that little curse or whatever it had on me, or binding spell, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I don't know. So maybe it wasn't quite sleep paralysis, not quite, but almost.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It was, yeah, I think it was whatever was happening was paralyzing you. But the other instances that you had described, you were up and about. So
Yeah.
it made me think that maybe it wasn't, altogether.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
So
very spooky story.
yeah, very mysterious. So, but it was still with me. So.
Yeah. Do you think that that's one of the reasons why you became interested in like the darker side of things?
I would say so, because I mean, I feel like that's just in general like a very common theme among like people who have experienced things, especially if they've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Either I feel like it's either on one or the other side, where it's just like either you want to learn more about it, or you just completely ignore it and don't bother with it.
Yeah.
So, and
So
obviously I swayed to one side.
Yeah, you decided to figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, because I think that would be the thing that most people would want to do. Like, if you experience that, the easiest thing would be to just try to rationalize it away.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Which is what a lot of people do. They just,
Yeah.
I don't know. It was like, oh, maybe it was a dream. Maybe it was, like whatever. So
it happens.
Definitely.
I mean, it happens, and I've been in that position before where I've had experiences that I believed wholeheartedly, and then as I've gotten older and aged over time, I've tried to rationalize it away to myself. And I mean, I think that in some ways it's almost seems to be a natural reaction to those kinds of things.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, our logical ego minds get in the way. Be like, it can't be true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just so everybody knows, all of Jackson's links are up at the top. So both of the YouTube channels where he does both different of podcasts, and his massively huge, gigantic book that he wrote. Do you have it with you? Show them how big it is.
Actually. So this is book 1. This is the cover. It's about 600 pages, like 615 or something like that. But this is kind of what hopefully you guys got it.
Yeah. Yeah, we can see it really well.
So so this is book 1 out of 5.
Yes.
So,
they're also freaking out. Only book 1.
Yeah. So, and this is pretty much, so this is 25 chapters. I'm writing the second book. It has 30 chapters. And so each book is going to be hopefully roughly around the same like length. I hope.
Wow.
That's my goal.
Yes.
So yeah. And I have a whole history that I made for it, and I'm making a language for it. It's like my big personal project. So I'm having a lot of fun with it. So
So that link is also up at the top. All of the links are pinned at the top, people. So check them out, sub and all that stuff.
Yeah. And for everyone listening on the podcast later, we'll have those links listed down below in the description. So make sure you check it out. So quick question for that. So I, I'm a history guy. I've had to do a lot of writing before, but nothing ever even approaching that amount of writing. How much time do you spend typically trying? What's the length of time it took you to kind of write it? And how much time were you spending, like a day or a week working on it? Yeah.
So tricky thing actually about this is I don't really have like a set time frame, because I first wrote, it began way back in like middle school for me. And that was when I started writing fantasy pretty much. Obviously it's terrible. It's trash because it was, middle school writing.
It's practice. That's practice. Yeah.
And then I kind of just like discarded it until like college. And then I started doing that again. I wrote the first draft, which was like a couple hundred pages, scrapped it again. And then it wasn't until I think it was maybe 2020 when I had, more time to write. And that's when I kind of just like sat down and like actually got serious about it. And that was actually when I made the entire, history, the outline. This book is considered in its timeline the third age. So I made the first, second, and third, all the while trying to develop a decent language. And yeah, it took me at least, I would say like maybe a good 2 years to write the first book, but only because I was creating all that other things along with it. And then obviously published in 2023 because that was all like the editing phase and getting the publication stuff and the rights to it and whatever. But yeah, I would say like a good 3 years, but now I'm trying to, not speed up the process, but like trying to pump out, the writing. So I spend maybe, because I usually have like scheduled for weeks. So like, since I have my Tolkien podcast, I'll record, like an episode or two on certain days. And then like maybe 3 days I'll write during the week. And that's like maybe 2-3 hours each night dedicated to writing.
Nice.
Take a few breaks every now and then, but yeah, I'm about halfway through the second book, so that's good.
Well,
I love that you said. I was going to say, I love that you said that you really started it in 2020 because it's like that. So many people started stuff in 20. Like that's when I started learning how to be a medium, and it always, I don't know. It kind of makes me sad and happy at the same time because we realized that if we had the time to actually do the things that we wanted to do instead of working ourselves to death, like see what we can do when we have the time to do it. Yeah.
How much more, like the fact that everyone can actually follow their creativity. And kind of, and embrace their creative side. Well, I mean, for instance, this is when this show came into being. I don't know if we necessarily started in 2020, but this is when we started talking about doing the show was in 2020. And we've had quite a few guests on, I guess, over these last couple of years that have talked about, like, when did you do this? Oh, it was in the lockdown.
It was 2020,
whether that's going over spirituality or ghost hunting or whatever people were doing. So yeah, that is very interesting. And like you said, Jenny, I think it's kind of sad. Imagine the creative consciousness we could have if we weren't all bogged down.
We were allowed to control our own time.
Yeah.
What could we do with it? Wow. We got to see it. We got to see it in 2020. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, Jackson, because it kind of reminds me of like for musicians. So maybe the second book will give you a better like this is a time frame I can write this kind of book in, because I don't know, in music we talk a lot about how a band has their whole life to write their first album, and then they have maybe a year or two to write their second. So
definitely.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, one of the reasons one of the things we decided to talk about when we were discussing with you on the Halloween special about coming on the show was specifically a kind of about Tolkien, because you have a Tolkien podcast. We were trying to figure out how to fit that into the paranormal and supernatural and all that kind of stuff that we typically talk about on the show. But, it really doesn't matter, because the good thing is it's our podcast, so we can talk about whatever we want to talk about.
There's a lot of weird stuff in Tolkien.
There is, and that's what I want to get into, especially if you're not familiar. If like you're someone who's watched the Lord of the, I imagine, Jackson, that most people have seen the movies, and I imagine that some saw like The Hobbit. And maybe someone here in chat, you can put in here too. If you've read or watched the movies, if you've read the books or watched the movies, let us know in chat. I imagine someone here read The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, but I imagine it's a very smaller number that's delved into things like the Silmarillion and the Lost Tales and another book we're going to talk about tonight, which I have right here, Letters from Father Christmas, which you turned me on to, and I was talking a lot about that on the show. I didn't even know that existed, but let's first get into kind of like what your podcast is kind of all about when it comes to Tolkien.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, I actually thought of this Tolkien podcast maybe like a year ago. So it's a brand new show still. So, but I was like, well, a lot of people do audiobooks. You know, they all know Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but and some people know Silmarillion. So I was just like, well, what if I just read the books from Tolkien that not a lot of people might know, and then kind of give my own personal comments and thoughts about it. So that's as a whole, that's kind of what it's about. Mm-hmm. And yeah, since then I've kind of branched out to shorter stories, and I actually did do a Halloween special for my show, and I talked about some of the darker creations that Tolkien made for his world, which doesn't include all of the entities that I've read through about Tolkien, only maybe 3 or 4 of them. So that's for the coming year, probably. Another Halloween special. So
yeah,
luckily he's got plenty of things that there's a lot of content there.
Yeah, there's a lot. So
yeah,
but that's in general, that's kind of what my Tolkien podcast is all about, and it's called Exploring Arda. So if anyone wants to check it out.
Exploring Arda. Type that in. Oh, we got the link above. Go
I got
check
the
it
link
out
up there.
Or go over to YouTube, and if you type that in, it'll come right up. That's how I found it. And you can go check it out. There's a bunch of content, a lot of content up over there. If you're interested in Tolkien, it's definitely worth a deep dive. And I kind of do go down Tolkien rabbit holes when I have nothing else to do on YouTube. It's one of my pastimes.
It's very fun.
Yeah, it is. Well, and the reason is, Jaxon, I think, is because a lot of people will make a movie, or they'll write a book, or they'll create some kind of, piece of art, but rarely, maybe if ever, does it get as expansive and as detailed and as all-consuming as the world that Tolkien created. So how has that, do you think, played a role in being able to have a podcast like Exploring Arda?
Well, actually, it's actually really glad that you mentioned it, because I named the podcast Exploring Arda because Arda is the world that Tolkien created. A lot of people think it's just Middle Earth and some lands off here and there, but Arda is the actual world. So I'm actually deep diving, exploring into his creations that he put into everything, from first age to fourth age, because he did start writing the story, in the fourth age, which, obviously it's not till later that I cover that, but that's kind of the whole thing that my show was about. I'm like, well, I'm reading through the stories, and I'm sometimes finding stuff that I just forgot about, and think it's intriguing that there's so much care that he put into it, and so much detail. And even though he didn't end up, finish writing it himself, like all his books, his son Christopher ended up, just taking all those notes, and same thing, took all that care and devotion to it, and pretty much just kept the legacy going. So
for sure. And it's amazing, on one hand, it's like, oh, he didn't get to finish all of his work, but I don't think that was something that ever would have been finished. I think it was there just would have been more unfinished works, the longer he would have lived, probably, right? I mean, so.
Yeah, that's a passion of life. It's any artist doesn't really stop ever making art. And it's what he was. Yeah, he's an artist with words, and apparently actually with art too, because of that Father Christmas book that nobody knew about, apparently, except for Jaxon.
That has some really cool art to it.
It does.
It does have some really cool art. So it's interesting, Jack, because I was over there, once we had you on, I was subscribed over there to Exploring Arda, and when you come out with the new video, you go over and check them out. And I'm a Christmas nut. I am. So, I love Tolkien, and I love Christmas. And so when I saw you had a Christmas special, I was like, okay, well, what's that about? And then it was like Letters from Father Christmas. And I was like, well, what's that? And then it's like Jarrow Tokens, and I'm like, what? How did I not know about this? And I think I probably ran into the next room later and told Jenny about it. And then
He told everyone about it.
I went Christmas shopping with my son. We went into the local bookstore, and as soon as he walked in the store, like one of the first shelves over to the left-hand side, there was one copy of Letters from Father Christmas, which I received from my family for Christmas. So that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for your podcast. So there you go.
My son made me go back out with him after they got home, and he was like, "We have to go get that book," and we did. We got the last one.
Yeah, I love that book, and I'm the same way too. Like both my wife and I, we absolutely love Christmas, and I think it was like that. Letters from Father Christmas. It was like I don't know, it was like the centennial edition or something like that, like 50 years or something. Mm-hmm. But it was like a compilation of all pretty much Tolkien's letters to his kids. So I'm like, that's really cool. So then I was just like, that's perfect for my podcast, and it was perfect timing for Christmas.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And so I guess, just to explain, if people who were like me who didn't know about this, that's what it is. Tolkien begins to write his kids in the early 1920s, 1920, I think it's the first letter. He writes a letter to his child as Father Christmas, as our friends across the pond refer to old Santa Claus as. And he continues to write his children every Christmas, sometimes maybe 2 letters from the North Pole that go all the way through their childhood. And they grow up, they kind of grow up to letters from Father Christmas that are written by, maybe not even arguably, maybe just is the greatest fantasy writer of all time. I mean,
I would agree with that.
I mean, it's really hard.
Who's going to argue with that?
I guess some would say C.S. Lewis. I think that's the only other person who kind of gets thrown into that argument. So, to me, that's amazing. To me, that's amazing to have such something from your father like that was for you and not for the rest of the world, right?
I would just like to say that it was 1920.
Yeah.
And 100 years later is 2020, which is what we were just talking about. I don't know. Some about that doesn't seem like a coincidence.
So when you were going over that on your Christmas special, did you have anything kind of cool that jumped out at you about Letters from Father Christmas?
Well, for me, I always appreciated in the images, you can see the actual like letters. And so he switches between the calligraphy. So like the way that he writes Father Christmas is different than when the quote unquote polar bear writes it, with like kind of like big markings. And then there's really cool things where like he includes runes later on in the book. And those are the Arctic language is runes. Yeah. And so that's kind of how they, I guess, write and communicate. But I mean, he still does English, but I just thought like just the little details like that were just really cool. So, and then of course he includes goblins in the stories because why not? So
yeah. It's all overlapping,
I just started, I started kind of picking at it over Christmas vacation. And then I decided to start reading it with my daughter for like bedtime stories. So I've been reading her like little, like 2 or 3 letters before she goes to bed.
Yeah.
And I've seen that growth already. As like, so it starts off like very just like novel, like, hey, this is Father Christmas or whatever. And then all of a sudden I've seen the token begin to happen. It's like, oh, this is the Arctic language. And all of a sudden all these are stories. And then it's like, I didn't know he was such a good illustrator.
You can't just leave it. You can't just leave it. It's gotta keep on rolling.
Extensive history.
Yeah. So like he really, if you like Tolkien, it's definitely worth checking out. Another thing I wanted to ask you about Tolkien specifically was we wanted to kind of delve into the spirituality of Tolkien because we do talk about a lot of spiritual stuff here. And I don't know if you've read the books or if you watch the movies. I think you get a general understanding maybe that there's just not average things going on, but the spirituality of Middle Earth really does extend pretty deep, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I would agree. Like throughout Lord of the Rings, throughout The Hobbit, throughout Silmarillion, you just go deeper and deeper. You'll see the connections. And and obviously with any fantasy thing, it's always the light versus the dark, right? So just that broad, like definition itself is like, it is a spiritual theme. like choosing the light path versus the dark path, and you see which are the heroes, which are the villains, why did they choose it, whatnot, things like that. So, but I think, I mean, like, I don't know where you want me to start with this, or
well, I mean, I think one of the. Oh, go ahead, Jenny.
Well, no, I think you go ahead. I think you might have a better question than me.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I don't know if a lot of people have really delved into. Well, I guess I would say it's not necessarily common knowledge to kind of understand like the gods and kind of like where that comes from, or the god and like a Luvatar. Can you kind of give a? It gets really deep. Is there a way you can give kind of a general explanation of who that is and kind of how that plays a role in Lord of the Rings?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, obviously it goes way back, Silmarillion First Age. You get Eru Iluvatar, who's the creator of everything, basically. He's God, basically. And he pretty much forms these beings called the Valar. And he pretty much puts into their thoughts his vision of what pretty much it's called Aya, which means it is, basically, like just the being itself. And then the way that they shape it is through Arda, and that's Arda is the world. So from Iluvatar goes to the Valar, and the Valar are pretty much like the gods who rule over Arda throughout the whole world. They're the protectors of both Valinor, where they're at, and obviously Middle-earth and the rest of Arda. And in the Silmarillion, it's called Beleriand, which later is actually sunken into the ocean and pretty much just kind of tossed aside. So,
yeah. And if
sounds familiar.
And if you're watching the TV show, that's talking about that, right? Isn't that Valeria that they're at in the TV show, or am I mistaken?
The thing is, I don't watch Rings of Power because a lot of the trailers I didn't like, kind of pissed me off, and I'm very much I'm very much a Tolkien, like it's called I don't know if it's right, the purist Tolkien, where it's like I like to go by the books and the source material. And there's been a lot of things where like my friends will tell me something will happen in the show, and I'm like, it didn't really happen. That I don't know. It bothers me, but I mean,
I got you.
I don't go out and hate on it. It's just not my thing, I feel like. So
I would say I can definitely understand where someone comes with that. So far I watched the first season and I felt like it was, you know, I didn't want to stop watching it. There are some, like I will say, like the Wheel of Time show. We gave up on that one. We were like, yeah, this just isn't quite.
It's a funny thing you mentioned that, because I actually have Wheel of Time, the whole series up there. So
please tell me the books are better than the television show. We had to give up on that one.
It was the same thing with Rings of Power. I chose not to watch it because of everybody saying that it was
probably a good idea.
Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah, to actually go back on the whole spiritual thing, is one of the Valars of in the Silmarillion is called Melkor. Yeah. And he creates this thing called Discord. And this is when Arda is being formed by music. And this music was formed in their minds, pretty much, their thought, because Iluvatar gave this thought to them. And so they're creating this music, creating the world through music, and then Melkor comes in with his Discord. He makes his own music, and he wants to be better than everybody else because he's pretty much the mightiest Valar, pretty much out of all of them. And so when he creates Discord, for me, it's during this Discord that he pretty much lets out like his own darkness into like, you know, into the world, into the void, things like that. And pretty much from Melkor, well, he's later called Morgoth. It's Melkor Morgoth. Stems Sauron. Obviously, everybody knows Sauron. That doesn't happen way later, but it's because of Morgoth. You know, the original source of evil. It's pretty much because of him. But, and I try to do that like kind of like very, very condensed version of of what happens, because I could go on and on and on.
Really interesting, because it's like kind of really what is.
Yeah.
You know, which I think Tolkien is so good at, because me and Princess Boo Boo were talking about this earlier. She said that she said, I swear he's tapping into another world or time.
Mhm.
And then to me, sometimes I think that he's just tapping into our own past. And the
Mhm.
way that you're explaining the spirituality of his world, it's just to me, from what I understand about our own spirituality, it's like he just figured it out and he wrote it in a different way that's, more narrative, I guess, but it's still the same. Like the music is the frequencies. Like we are made of sound. That's a huge part of like why we exist. And yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah. No, definitely. I totally agree. And I don't know, just the way that he thinks literally outside the box. Like it's like
Yeah.
Iluvatar made this thing called Ea, like it is, it exists. But like
Yeah.
outside of it, there's other things that still exist that he doesn't go into, but there are things out there, like
which
that,
is it's just that's what it is. We do just exist. We just are. But there's other stuff out there. There's a lot of stuff out there.
I think that was one of the things that really drove me, like, kind of, I don't know, it kind of got me really interested in the mythology and the spirituality of the Lord of the Rings, was the fact that all this is based off the song of Iluvatar, like, we were discussing.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, that sounds a little bit like string theory. Like,
yeah.
So it's, and this is, like you said, I mean, we're going back to their, earlier part of the 20th century. So, I mean, that, it's pretty crazy, I think, to get into.
Yeah. And I guess like on like a side note, I always picture the Discord of Melkor. So like Iluvatar has all these like nice classical instruments, nice and soothing and whatnot. And then Melkor comes in with like death metal and he's just like, this is better. He's trying to do that. But only because I love my death metal, but it's like complete opposite. So
well, and that introduction of that character with the discord of is really just like the polarities of our own world, like the negative and the positive and the light and the dark. Like that's us. That's our existence. Yeah.
And I don't know, I'll continue to kind of like tag along with like the Melkor, because Melkor, his name shifts to Morgoth, which is basically like the elven tongue, I think, of Morgoth, which means the black foe of the world. So it's a very menacing title.
Yeah, he's getting a bad rap at that point.
Yeah, very, very much so. And it's actually because of his treacheries and his betrayals that makes the whole world kind of fall apart, which kind of also ties back into that whole light and dark thing, where it's just like you choose one path. So let's say if some of the dark elves in the story, they listen to Morgoth saying that he's going to promise them some lands, and in the end he pretty much screws them over and turns his back, and now the elves are not so happy, but they're still connected to him. And it actually kind of happens with Sauron, where Sauron's so close to Morgoth, and behind Morgoth, Sauron's very close in power. It's just that Sauron is not a Valar; he's a Maiar, or fallen Maiar, I should really say, like a very powerful one. But the difference between Morgoth and Sauron is that Sauron chooses the mental path. So he, instead of like dominating Arda through force and strength, like physical, like sending legions and legions of armies, Sauron takes over the lands by will, dominating people's wills, forcefully turning them pretty much to the dark side, pretty much through manipulation and all that stuff, which, goes I think it ties strongly with spirituality, is like who and what to listen to, and Sauron obviously is the darker side, where he controls like the ring wraiths and whatnot, and they're very much, I mean, they're wraiths, so I mean,
yeah,
they ain't real nice. What was the difference between the Valar and the Maiar again?
So the Valar were pretty much like the chosen protectors from Iluvatar. So they were like there at the beginning of the creation, pretty much. So it was like Iluvatar created the Valar, and then the Valar, and they were actually originally they were called the Ainur. So there was a portion in the Silmarillion called the Music of the Ainur. That's the creation, and then they were pretty much renamed as the Valar. And then the Maiar are the pretty much the wizards, if you want to say, like gifted with the magic. So,
yeah. So Gandalf is a Maiar, and the Balrog is a Maiar also.
Yes.
So it's kind of like the corrupted. Yeah, that was like one of the things. So it's like when Gandalf fights the Balrog, that's that really is a huge showdown there.
Yeah, it's like he meets his match. Gandalf meets his match on that point.
The Balrog didn't stand a chance.
It's actually kind of funny with mentioning Balrogs, because in the Silmarillion there's a thing called the Fall of Gondolin, and Gondolin is one of the bigger elven cities, but it's a hidden city, and the way it falls is because one of the people from the inside are actually, they sway to Morgoth's side, treachery, and then the Fall of Gondolin happens. They literally send maybe like a whole swarm of orcs, but also Balrogs and dragons. So there's all of that. So there's not just one Balrog, there's like 5 of them or something like that. So
the dragons get a real bad rap in Tolkien too.
Yeah.
We're all about some dragons around here. For some reason just recently. So we don't want to hear about bad dragons anymore.
Well,
there's a lot of bad dragons.
Unfortunately, I think in Tolkien's world, all the dragons were bad. They were created by.
There any good dragons in Tolkien?
Melkor, yeah.
They were all
no
good
dragons.
Wow.
No Puff the Magic Dragon or
no boo.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not like a never-ending story,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Falcor.
But we want Falcor.
I thought that was one of the wonderful things that Tolkien would talk about, and that's that he was creating a world for other people to live in with their creativity. He mentions that a couple different, I've read a couple different times where he said that basically he was creating a world for other people to play in. And, in a lot of ways, I think that made him even more accessible and kind of set the trend for the later fantasy that was going to come in the 20th century and into today. So we could have Falcor, because that stuff doesn't necessarily exist beforehand,
Yeah.
All right. So while we're kind of on the spiritual topic, I want to bring up someone else who kind of has, we've talked about Iluvatar and the Maiar and the Valar and all that. Now there's one that, like you said before, when the new TV show, a little bit of a purist, wasn't including some things or changing things. And one of the things that has disappointed me with every iteration, whether it was like the cartoons or whether it was the TV show, or it's the movie, I can understand it, but I've always been disappointed with excluding Tom Bombadil. How do you feel about the exclusion of Tom Bombadil?
Yeah. I think everybody would love to see a version of Tom.
He needs his own movie. What are they waiting for?
Nowadays with all the spinoffs and stuff, they probably could make it happen.
Right. Like the thing is, I understand why they didn't put it in the movie is because it would kind of like I feel like a lot of the audiences who haven't read the book would be like, why did they go into the forest, get saved by this weird dude who dances and sings, and then they just continue on their way, which is what happens in I think 3 chapters. They go through the old forest and whatnot. Tom is interesting. I have like a lot of theories for him.
What do you think he is? Because he's not
actually going to be my next question.
I mean, he's got some extra special stuff going on. And if I remember correctly, isn't he supposed to be like really old? And like, who's the lady that lives with him?
His wife, yeah.
She's real weird too. So what's going on with them?
And so there's a lot of theories out there, but for me, I actually think he is either one of two options. Either one, a forgotten Ainur, so from the very beginning, because he calls himself eldest. He's the oldest one. He was there before the trees.
Oh, yeah.
Literally before trees. So I'm like,
Yeah.
well, what's before the trees? The Valar or the Ainur when they're making their songs. Or he could be a very super powerful Maiar, which I feel like doesn't elevate him to his level because he's the ring. The ring has no effect on him.
Yeah.
He literally takes it, makes it disappear, and then it just reappears again, and he thinks it's all a joke. So,
yeah.
That's kind of like my first thoughts.
That would make sense if he was one of the original, one of the original ones.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So I feel like maybe it's possible, but then maybe he's a Maiar, very, very powerful Maiar, maybe one of the first Maiars, because they were also there like way, way earlier. And his wife, Goldberry, I feel like, I feel like she's might be some sort of like druid, part of the nature itself, because he stays in his forest, the old forest, and a lot of some parts of the forest are like kind of twisted, and they've turned dark, but his little humble abode in his house, like he always makes sure that his wife is there, like she's always at the house or by the stream, but never too far. So I'm like, well, maybe she's some kind of like trapped druid under some weird spell that he can't let her go further on, because
or maybe part of the reason why his part of the forest isn't twisted is because she's there.
Right. Yeah. Something like that.
So, like a nature spirit is always kind of what I thought, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What? So are you familiar with the theory that Tom Bombadil is actually Tolkien?
Yeah. I've heard that too, and it would make perfect sense, really. Tolkien loved his trees, so it would only make sense. I feel like, and
which wouldn't he be one of the Valar? Because he's the one who wrote the damn book, right?
Yeah. and I think that quote, like, I was there before. I've been here before everything else. I was there before the trees. Could kind of be like Tolkien doing a wink, wink there.
Yeah. I feel like that. And there was like theories too that Tom is actually Iluvatar. He's the creator.
Oh, he is the creator.
Oh wow, yeah.
Oh. Which is that makes sense, because if Tom Bombadil is Tolkien, he is the creator.
Yeah.
I think we just figured it out. Let's put this mystery to bed. That's what it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Done.
There's a lot of things about him, but
you can go down the rabbit hole in this stuff. I had a friend of mine who took some college courses at Virginia Tech on Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. So
yeah, I wish I could have done that, but I'll do it on myself. That's the whole point of my show, is just to keep digging deeper. So.
So what I was interested to hear, what were a couple of the darker entities that you highlighted in your Halloween special?
Yeah, so one of my favorite entities is called Ungoliant. She actually is super evil, and she comes supposedly from the void. So the void is pretty much outside of Arda, which in my view just is space, empty void, the final frontier, things like that. So Ungoliant, basically she I suppose was like considered a shapeshifter in a way, because her first form wasn't really established, but she took the form of a giant spider pretty much. So in Lord of the Rings, there's Shelob the spider, which is in the films, it's in Return of the King. The books, it's in Two Towers. But so Shelob is very tiny compared to Ungoliant. Shelob is like this small, and Ungoliant's huge. She comes from the void, and she pairs with Morgoth to pretty much destroy the trees of Valinor, which is basically like the holy light of the Valar. And so Ungoliant comes in, sneaking in with Morgoth to destroy the trees. Morgoth stabs the tree with like his own like cursed blade from a spear, and then Ungoliant drinks the light from the trees.
Good
so
Lord.
She's literally a light devourer.
She's awful.
So
go back to the void. Get out of here.
The only
damn spider.
The only thing that she eats is light. Like,
oh my god. Yeah,
and
that's a good one.
There's a lot of like terrifying like paintings and drawings and digital art about Ungoliant that fits absolutely perfect. She's like a entity of dread, pretty much.
Yikes.
And she actually ends up dying by eating herself because there's no more light for her to eat, because that the hunger from the light of Valinor was so much that she needed more than that. But going over to Middle Earth, she couldn't get that same hunger, that same satisfaction, so she ended up pretty much eating herself. And and so she
good way to go.
But before that, she created a whole bunch of her own spawn of like evil creatures, and one of them is Shelob, long descended, and
that makes sense.
So, and the weird thing about Ungoliant is that there's really no origin to Ungoliant other than she came from the void. So I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. So she came outside of Arda. So does that mean Ungoliant's an alien? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's been coming up a lot in our explorations of the spiritual worlds is that there's really everything starts with like a consciousness.
Yeah.
So that it makes me think that she's just like a consciousness floating around out there, and in whatever, and then she through her own thoughts was able to give herself a form, which is, I think, once again, Tolkien understands way more about the universe than we did, apparently.
And to like kind of tie it back all from the beginning, from Melkor, he does his Discord, right? And one of the thoughts that I had was when he made that Discord, it was before the world was fully formed. So like, what if some of that Discord went out into the void, poisoned some other, I don't know, sections of the void, and she was one of them, drawn toward the source, so.
Wow.
But
interesting.
And it just highlights the like the horror of what is out there, like the void. Like, I feel like that was something he might have just kind of highlighted as well. Just be like, well, we know that we're probably not the only ones, in space. There are things out there, but what is out there? Like, we can guess.
Hopefully not massive spiders that devour light. Let's hope that's not true.
So it's so like things like that just always got me drawn toward like dark entities and the mysterious things that can't really be explainable, like little things like that. And like even Sauron in the Silmarillion, he's actually considered a shapeshifter later on when he meets up with Beren and Luthien, which for Tolkien, that's pretty much him and his wife is Beren and Luthien, because that's actually what they put on their tombstones.
Oh wow!
Yeah, Tolkien has Beren and his wife has Luthien, so very, very sweet.
Cute, real cute.
But Sauron, he changes like multiple forms in order to stop them, and he still gets defeated. But it's pretty cool, and like he's in charge of the Isle of Werewolves in the Silmarillion. He has his own tower, of course, in this island. He always has to have his tower. So, but just the whole mental strength of Sauron is insane, where even the Valar are like, they know that he's a threat. They don't do much to him, but they just know that he's a threat. And it's kind of a bummer because the Valar actually, they kind of leave Middle Earth alone for most of the Silmarillion, which kind of sucks because they're protectors of Arda and they don't really do much.
But if Tolkien was thinking about little old Earth too, we all have free will. We have to figure it out ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was kind of the point too, where it's just like if they're not helping, like what are you going to choose? So
Yeah. Well, that's actually a good point, and I want to delve into kind of like the historical side of it. Like, could we draw the connection with the spiritual? But I think you can get a better idea of the spiritual if you understand maybe discussing a little bit of the connection with history. But before we do that, we've reached past the top of the hour at 9 o'clock here. So I just want to let everybody know, if you've joined us since the beginning of the show, today we have Jaxon Schelhaas on, and he's has a podcast over on YouTube called Exploring Arda. So the links for that are at the top. And he also is the author of his own book, The Lands of Ordia, Power of Heavens, which you can also click the link on to go check out on Amazon and purchase that. We've had him on previously for the Halloween special, and we had him back on tonight to talk about some more things, including Tolkien. I also just want to kind of highlight for everybody who's been coming in, we aren't going to be here. We're not going to be here next week. We're not going to be on Twitch doing the show
live witching hours next week.
But the plan is to have an episode. Saturday, we are going to the Hanover Tavern Paracon. We are going to be meeting with a lot of people that we've met through this show and through other
former guests.
Things.
Yeah.
And so we are going to be recording an episode of the Witching Hours on Saturday. And we will probably also go live a little bit and hang out with you guys while we're there. Maybe show some people around the Paracon, stuff like that. But we will have that all edited and put together, hopefully for next Thursday, and we'll just have it up on YouTube. So I'll set that up as a premiere. So instead of coming to Twitch, if you need your Witching Hours fix, it'll be over on YouTube next week. So that's what we have going on. And then we're going to have some other guests coming up that we'll talk about towards the end of the show. Also, to remind everybody in here, it's going to be busy because we have your stream tomorrow night, the Friday stream, the almighty Friday stream. We have Saturday, we have the Paracon that we're going to be going to and meeting a lot of our guests, which that's kind of like my goal is like, once we have guests on here that we get along with, it's like really cool to meet them, and get to hang out with them in real life. So that's cool.
Yeah.
And then Monday, you're going to be going to the other side of the microphone, right?
Yeah, I get to be on the light gate with Preston Dennett and Dolly Saffron. I'm so excited.
Yeah, that's going to be cool. So I think
I've been binging their podcasts, and yeah, I can't wait to sit down with them and talk aliens and stuff. Yeah.
So I think what we're going to do Monday is I'll jump on my stream, hang out with everyone. We'll kind of chill out, hang out, and then we'll just kind of all 9 o'clock. We'll kind of guide over to the YouTube there and go hang out in their chat. So anyway, we got a lot coming up. So stay up to date on that, and you can visit the witchinghourspodcast.com if you have any questions about what's coming up in the future. And you can also join our Discord. There's always lots of cool stuff going on over there in our Discord. People sharing weird, supernatural, paranormal stories.
Cool. Oh, y'all find some weird stuff, man. Yeah. There's some weird. If you need some weird fix, you just need to go over the Discord.
Or if you're always coming up with if you always find some articles and you're like, man, I want to know what people think about this, feel free to throw it up there. And then I also try to get those into the news. So anyway, that's what we have going on. Okay. So back to our topic, Jaxon. I wanted to ask a little bit about, so I'm the history nerd. No, I'm not just a normal nerd. I'm also a history nerd. So I've always been kind of curious about how Middle Earth and J.R. Tolkien had his works kind of shaped by his real life and the influences that had on that. Is there anything about that you want to speak to?
Well, I mean, I guess a lot of people who are into Lord of the Rings know that during, the First World War is when he was initially drafted. When he was super young, he had his buddies with him. And I'm blanking on the name, so sorry. I'm not an expert on Tolkien. I'm just a big fan.
Yeah.
I know that they had like.
Well, you're an expert now. You've been on a podcast as a Tolkien expert, so you can put that in your next bio.
Sure.
Yeah.
I know, because I know that he had his own, like his own. It wasn't much of a. I don't think it was like a book club, but it was like they shared different arts and hobbies and stuff like that. It's basically like him and his friends actually ended up going to war, and a couple of them actually ended up dying during this war because World War I was terrible.
Yeah,
like it was bad, so bad. It was like, well, you probably know like a whole bunch of stuff about it. I don't really have to cover much.
World War I was, if we thought World War II was awful, World War I was like,
for the quality of life of people who were in the war was even worse than normal. Yeah.
And it was actually during part of when Tolkien was in the trenches, literally during trench warfare, is when he started jotting down the first pretty much creations of what Arda in general would be. A lot of like, I think it's like the Lost, maybe it's the Lost Tales, I forget. It's one of the histories of Middle Earth that he started writing it down, just in notebooks, whatever he could. And I feel like just that sense of fear, trying to survive every day, not even knowing if you're going to see it tomorrow, and your best buddies die. It's all that shaped a lot for his stories, especially just during wartime, because in Lord of the Rings, that's what it is. It is the whole time it's war.
Yeah.
And choosing to either to push on through all of that or to, give up, a lot of that I feel like stems with like Samwise. He's with his friends, and he sees a lot of them struggle. Obviously he sees, Frodo struggle a whole lot, but he still has to push through for them. And just try to push through that. And, it goes down to mental strength again, where it's all this death and terror around you. Like, what do you do? And so
it's interesting too, because it kind of goes down to like, I never really thought about that, but you really did make me think about the connection that Sam and Frodo have is very much like two people who are together in war, where like they're going to follow that other, they're not going to give up on that other person until the end. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I feel like the four hobbits are literally him and his friend group, because he had three other friends that he pretty much hung out with. And I mean, there's four hobbits, Frodo, Sam, Merry, Pippin. Feel like that's just
from the Shire.
Yeah, exactly. They all just came from
clearly England.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I think he was either him like himself or Christopher saying that like Middle Earth was supposedly what England was before, it got modernized and whatever. So
yeah. From what I understand, Middle Earth was, so one of the things that I read about Tolkien, which was kind of interesting, once again, being a history guy, is Tolkien was kind of upset that England didn't have an ancient history. It really doesn't, because you have the Celts and Picts and all kinds of different people groups there that were basically ran out at some point in time. And so it's like ever changing until the Saxons get there and the Angles. And so they kind of have like this fictional history. I don't know if we can get into that maybe one day. I have somebody want to talk about King Arthur, but you kind of have like King Arthur kind of starts the fictional history of, and he wanted to create that ancient history, like that Egyptian, Sumerian, Greek, Roman kind of history for England. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. And then, the big connection of like this industrialization that was happening during the war. And then, like we talked about earlier, like the love of the trees and the love of nature and how it was all being disturbed, very much reflected by, I think, his experiences in World War One.
Definitely. I would totally agree, because I mean, he was born even before like the whole industrial area. And I mean, the whole thing with Saruman in Lord of the Rings, with Saruman having these machines of war, and he's trying to like up everybody else with this technology, but it's really the trees, the Ents, who end up winning the battle. And I feel like I have I know that some people have like connections to artists and authors and stuff like that, and I always feel kind of like connected to Tolkien too, because like one of my absolute favorite things to do in spring and the summer is literally just to go walk out into the forest and then just kind of kind of breathe in nature, you know. It's for me, it's just really, really nice. And
imagine that the trees are ants.
yeah,
That's what I do. Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
But
I hadn't thought of, I'm glad that you guys brought that up about World War One, because I hadn't thought of the fact that the imagery of all of the battles in the war in the story is totally World War One. You know, like that's it. Yeah. So the fact that he experienced that firsthand and then it shows up in his stories. Yeah.
And there's I think it's either Two Towers or Return of the it's Return of the King. I know in the movies they do it really well where Éomer is talking to Éowyn, so the names are always kind of close. But he's pretty much talking to her about like the terrors of war, and that, you know, Pippin, you know, a tiny little hobbit, shouldn't go into war because he might have like the passion, the he wants to fight for Middle Earth, but like he probably shouldn't because it's really scary out there. The battlefield is not something that you want to rush into. You know, where it's just like you get like the screaming and the yelling and the death, and everybody's getting their limbs chopped off or something exploded, or it's all that I feel like was part of his experience, and just everything that he not only like saw, but he smelled and he felt, and like it was a terrible time. And so he pretty much morphed that into his own fantasy tale, which I mean, and he's a great describer, so I think it just matches perfectly. So.
Not to get off on a side tangent about things, but there's so much great visual art that comes from World War One too, and I just am in my mind I'm paralleling it to our pandemic. You know, it's like. No matter, I guess we can loop it back around to the whole beginning of the Tolkien story, of the Lord of the Rings story, where it's like you have the good and the bad, you have the dark and the light, but without both of those things, you can't have the whole creation.
Right.
Like this terrible shit that happens to us in our lives sometimes creates the most wonderful, beautiful things. So would we have Lord of the Rings without World War One?
Yeah, probably
doubtful.
Not.
You know?
Would Jaxon have started his gigantic, massive story without the pandemic? You know?
It's actually kind of funny that you kind of mentioned that, because that's actually what my series is kind of all about, is in order to achieve this light, to kind of almost like walk in the light, is you have to go through darkness. You know, you have to go through your own dark days, and there's a lot of things that happen in my series that is just full of, you know, tragedy. There's a lot of darkness, but in order to get that final good ending, and you got to walk through that evil, walk through that darkness. And I guess, like, I know that there's a lot of things for like trying to envision yourself, you know, around, you know, with yourself with light when you're trying to like meditate or something like that. You know, trying to protect yourself, because it's like that's, you know, you're choosing to, you know, walk in the light rather than the darkness. Obviously, people can go, you know, whichever way.
Either one.
Be like, oh well, walking in the dark feels good, feels easy, you know, like I like to be dark, you know. And then other people will be like, well, I like to walk in the light because, you know, it's like it might be harder, but I mean, you know,
as long as we don't run into that damn spider, we'll be okay.
As long as I'm going, it doesn't show up, we're okay.
She ain't sucking my light. Get out of here. Princess Boo Boo had a good comment about the tree stuff. She said in Australian Aboriginal culture, the trees hold knowledge and wisdom.
Yep. Yeah. It's basically like, for Tolkien, it is kind of like that. It's like a memory of what the original light pretty much was, you know, preserving that memory. And I feel like that kind of ties a little bit, might be loose about it, but pretty much containing that memory. And I actually have the tattoo of the trees of Valinor on my arm.
That's awesome.
Just because
I got a tree tattoo too, but it's not from Lord of the Rings, and it's on a place I can't show it to you on television or on the screen. you Switch or wherever the hell we're at.
I'll have to TV mature that up. There was another question here too that we had earlier from Hoaxers, which is interesting. He says, another fun theory. Do you think Lord of the Rings is in the same world as Harry Potter, or Lord of the Rings takes place before Harry Potter, of course? And I guess I would kind of extend his question is, or do we think that at least, if nothing else, it influenced it?
I guess to cover the first one, technically you could possibly say it if you really, really want to extend that that theory. Because I've read the Harry Potter series, amazing. Watched all the movies, huge fan. I even have a golden snitch tattoo on my leg.
Well,
love it. But if we're going along the theory that Tolkien made Middle Earth as a very old England, I would say why not? Why not?
Yeah.
Because I guess with Harry Potter, you can like hide the magic. They try to hide the wizarding world among the Muggles. So it's like, why not? Why can't there be a little magic of Iluvatar still floating around? Maybe a Maya or two are still kind of there, and then they expanded into Harry Potter or something like that.
Yeah,
it would be a good origin story for where the wizards and witches came from.
Right.
So here's another question for you. If we know from Harry Potter lore that Merlin was a Slytherin, then what house would Gandalf have been in?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question, actually. I don't know, because Gandalf, he knows, he has a lot of knowledge. He knows a lot of lore, a lot of history. I don't really know. I would...
He's also very brave.
Exactly. He's very brave.
Yeah.
Very wise.
Very smart. Wise. I would put him in the Ravenclaw house, simply because he has.
That's what Hoaxer said too. Yeah. Ravenclaw. Princess Boo Boo says Ravenclaw. Everybody's in agreement.
My guess would be Ravenclaw. All those Hufflepuff people and Gryffindor people are gonna throw a fit, but that's Ravenclaw right there.
You get like Hufflepuff. You think of like Merry and Pippin. That's like kind of.
Oh yeah, Merry and Pippin are definitely Hufflepuffs.
Maybe Radagast. Maybe Radagast could have been a Hufflepuff.
Oh yeah, he's definitely a Hufflepuff. Yeah.
And then and you get like Sam, who's obviously Gryffindor because he's very brave and courageous. Frodo might be a little tricky. He might fit into Gryffindor just because he accepts the danger and he knows what he's doing. I don't know. And then obviously Slytherin's, the bad guys. You get like Grima Wormtongue. He's a Slytherin. Or
Slytherin for sure. Agree with the Wormtongue for sure.
No question.
Because he's got the worm in his name. That's what not to get way off topic here, but I guess it's not a big deal if we're talking about Harry Potter a little bit. But I always thought it was interesting that she put Merlin in, because that kind of changes up. Does that change up? Yeah, I know it doesn't matter, but in the lore. Would that change how we think about Merlin, or does it change the way that we think about Slytherin?
I feel like, I don't know, because I feel like with Slytherin, it's they get a lot of the bad rap, right? It's there's a lot of villains into it, but I guess to kind of go along with the main series as well, you get Draco, who he turns pretty bad, later on in the series, but eventually he ends up. Pretty a decent guy, I would say, and he's a Slytherin, and there's like moments of redemption.
Snape, let's not forget Snape.
And Snape, he's dark for a long time, but
pretending to be bad, but he's not really been bad for a long time. Yeah.
So I feel like with Merlin, he was probably sorted into it because he had a lot of potential. Obviously, it's Merlin, but. Trying to like maybe hone his skills to like the extreme. Maybe that's why he got put into Slytherin, because he knows, like maybe I don't know, just like in general, being sorted into Slytherin, being like, you have a lot of potential, you can grow on it, but choosing, back to it again, choosing between the light and the dark, what path you want to choose, that's up to you.
It's an interesting little side. Thanks, Hoaxers. Thanks for the Harry Potter question.
And if anybody else has any questions, anything they're curious about, feel free to throw your question in chat. It makes it easier for us to see it if you click on the channel point redemption and just click on highlight message, and we'll get your questions to Jaxon for you. So if you have them, get them in there, and we'll get them before the end of the show. Yeah, a lot of conversation tonight. I was looking back earlier, and a lot of people. I know I saw CMC had said that he had read the books multiple times. So I think we have a crowd in here tonight that's pretty familiar with it. But he also said that he hadn't seen the letters from Father Christmas book before either. So there you go.
Yeah.
You got that. You were successful in getting the word out.
Yeah,
That's good.
Write a letter to the estate of Tolkien and let them know that you use some.
Yeah. That'd be huge.
So we didn't really ever start with like the first question of what would probably have been the beginning of this conversation. But like, how old were you when you read any of his works the first time?
Yeah. The funny thing is, I actually read the Silmarillion first.
No way.
Yeah, I'm one of the very, very rare people who have done that.
Yeah, I was gonna say I didn't think that was even possible.
No, because I was 13, and there was pretty much way back. Yeah, I think I was 13, and my parents had a stash of books that they kind of like put away, pretty much in the attic, right? Attic space. It wasn't like an actual attic. It was like a side room on the upstairs. And I think I just finished reading Percy Jackson and I think it was around that time, probably somewhere around there. I remember finished reading a series, maybe it was Narnia, and I was like, oh, I want more fantasy. I'm trying to get myself into this. And yeah, my parents were like, oh, you could probably find something up there. So I started digging around, and I found this copy of the Silmarillion, which I think was Feanor crafting the Silmarils on the front cover. It's a really cool thing. I have it in my room. I don't have it with me, but it would be really cool to show. But so I was like, oh, that looks pretty cool. And it's a hard name to read, but I'll still try it out. And it took me a long time to read through it.
And it did.
But I stuck through it, and I'm like, okay, like some of the parts I got really bored, but I just kept going through. Took me a long time, and then I told my parents, I was like, oh, I'm reading this really big book, and they're like, that there's Lord of the Rings, and I was like, oh, Lord of the Rings, what's that?
And how come you guys didn't tell me this before I read this book?
Yeah, and the funny thing is, they showed me the movies before that, so I knew what Lord of the Rings was on film.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know what the Silmarillion was until I read it, and they're like, yeah, this is a prequel to Lord of the Rings. So I was just like, oh, there's books of Lord of the Rings, and they're like, yeah.
Well, that's I kind of have a similar story with how I discovered all that. So I actually played Dungeons and Dragons first when I was a kid. So nice. I would play with my dad and my friends, and then my friend who played with me, I don't know, I was like hanging out at his house or whatever, and him and his dad got all excited because The Hobbit was coming on TV, and I was like, "What's The Hobbit?" They're like, "You've never seen The Hobbit before?" And of course, it's like the old Arrakeen base. And I was like, "Okay, I was like, I'll check it out." I think I might have been even like spend the night or something. So I was like, "Okay, cool." And so it was like this special kind of thing to hang out with my friend's family and kind of watch it. And I was like, "Oh, that's super cool," because I was into Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. And then down the road some ways, I think it was like in 7th grade, my English teacher, we read The Hobbit in class. And I didn't realize, I think I made the connection, but as we read the book, I was like, man, this is so awesome. And then at the end of reading that book, I went up to her and I was like, this is my favorite book of all time. I really wish they would make a sequel. And she said, well, there is. It's called The Lord of the Rings. And I was like, really? And she was like, it's 3 books. And she went to her desk and she got the Fellowship of the Ring and she gave it to me.
Oh, best teacher ever.
Yeah, so that's how I read the Fellowship of the Ring. And so it's kind of the same thing of like, how do I want more of this? How do I get in there? Yeah. And that's the good thing about Tolkien, and the good thing I guess for your podcast is there is lots more stuff if you want it,
There's so much, yes. that old animated movie is so good. I absolutely love it. Of The Hobbit. Oh,
It
it's so
is.
good.
Yeah.
A lot of great music in there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It really brings out the songs of the dwarves that they have in there. It's just it's so cool.
And to be able to do it and abbreviate it down as much as they had to and still do it justice, I think was commendable. Like, cause and also where I think, I don't know if you share the opinion that I do, Jackson, but I was not happy with the Hobbit movies.
I mean, not really.
Yeah.
Like, the way that I explain to people is that I enjoy it as a fantasy trilogy. I don't enjoy it because I've read The Hobbit.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. You know, where I think they got themselves in trouble with that film, or at least what I'll say, you know, after I've had a couple too many beers and we're talking about it, is you know, you could take The Hobbit and turn it into like a, I don't know, what is it, like a 25-minute cartoon, and it was fine. But I think where they messed up was trying to turn it into 3 movies. They got too greedy with it.
Yeah. Oh, I definitely agree. They put a lot of things that weren't necessary. Just it didn't need 3 films. Like,
why is Thorin got to be like a hot dwarf?
Yeah. One of my biggest issues was the appearance of the dwarves. A lot of them were supposed to be around the same age. Obviously, Baum was supposed to be the oldest, but like everybody else was supposed to have
all
really
old
long
dudes.
beards and long hair, scruffy looking, you know, just really ragged, and that's not what we got.
Yeah,
Thorin
was the only one
doing
I had beef
hot
with.
dwarves. No hot dwarves. Thank you.
Yeah, and Tariel is another story for me because she's not even. She's not supposed to be there.
It was disappointing.
I said I probably need to go back and watch them again. Maybe watch them again, like you said. Watch them as just like, hey, I'm going to watch this thing about fantasy world, and because I do feel like they were for that. Like, if you hadn't read The Hobbit, they would probably be completely like, oh, those are wonderful movies, you know? Probably. I
would agree.
They did such a good job with the Lord of the Rings movies. So how did they go so wrong with the Hobbit movies?
you had Peter Jackson coming back. So like when I heard Peter Jackson was doing it, it was like, well, there we go. It's guaranteed to be good. Like it's just they're going to keep going. Like, how are you going to mess this up?
Because I remember going to the theaters and I was just like, I was so excited. Oh, I was so excited for that first film going out in theater with The Unexpected Journey. And I watched it, and at the end, I was just like, they better speed the story up a little bit because And then I heard that they were making a trilogy, and I was like, oh, okay, that's why.
I think they could have done it in 2 parts. I felt the same way. Even I will say, when I watched the first one, I was still excited for them. I was like, okay, I was happy with the first one. The second one and the third one is where they lost me on it. CMC said that is one thing that the Rings of Power did well was the presentation of the dwarves, which you haven't watched. Yeah, but I will agree with that. I think the Rings of Power TV show did do a good job with the dwarves.
Yeah, I saw like images of like pretty much like their whole community, and that looked pretty cool. I don't know.
They actually put the female dwarves in there and with beards and stuff, which is really cool to see. Yeah. Because we miss out on all of that in Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Like, you know, they don't get talked about, or there's no female dwarf characters. So that's kind of neat. Yeah.
The thing about the dwarves is, I mean, it stems back to the Silmarillion too, where one of the Valar actually ends up creating the dwarves, but he made it in secret of Iluvatar. So that's why we see a lot more of the elves, because the dwarves were pretty much, in a way, like cursed to wait until the elves were awoken, pretty much into Arda, and then on top of that, the dwarves were always going to be arguing with everybody else, especially with the elves. They'd be in the mountains all the time, trying to, delve, more greedily and too deep, as the movies say. So. But I think I feel like the show was trying to maybe to include the dwarves, because there really wasn't a lot. There was Gimli in Lord of the Rings, which he was amazing, and that's kind of all we really get. And then Hobbit came in, obviously, with that whole story, but they, especially with like Thorin, they really give dwarves a bad rap, where it's just like, oh, they're just these grumpy people who just want to be in the mountains all the time, but there's so much more to them.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
But
so what do you have coming up? Like, what ideas do you have coming up on for exploring Arda? What are you going to be getting into over this next year?
Yeah, so I actually started reading The Fall of Numenor. So this is at the very end of the Silmarillion. There's this section called a Calibeth, and it's literally just the story of the downfall of Numenor and all about the Numenorians and their culture and their traditions. I think it was either last year or the year before that they came out with the book of Fall of Numenor, and so I was just like, well, I might as well just read the book, the whole book, instead of reading the Calibeth. So I finished reading the Silmarillion, and now I'm on to Fall of Numenor, which is really cool. So, and I've skimmed through the book, but I haven't fully read it, so I'm pretty excited for that.
Awesome.
And that's currently that, and then I have a couple other like short stories by Tolkien that I plan to read. Hopefully, pretty soon. There's a story called Roverandom where like toys come alive, and that pretty much. Yeah, details the story of, I think it's like a toy puppy, all of his adventures. So, and hopefully
not a Chucky before Chucky.
No, it's not that way.
The horror genre. Well, no, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we haven't talked a whole lot about your other podcast, Drink and Dried. What do we have going on over there? What have you guys been talking about?
Yeah, so we're trying to like kind of like reformat the show, because before we talked about movies, shows, D&D, all that fun stuff, and my friend and I, we really love the passion of like horror movies, terror stuff. So like a lot of our movies that we've covered are a bunch of horror movies, but this year we just finished recording one like a couple of days ago. That'll be up pretty soon. We're like more in the experimental phase. We've been recording for 2 years, but we didn't get video until like last year, just because I didn't really get the tech. Because I've been struggling financially for a while. So, because we started that actually 2021, so like a year after COVID. So obviously, that all happened. So there wasn't a lot, but we just kind of continue to plan out like movies. We just recorded one that we, I don't know if you know the movie Arrival or not.
Jenny has it as one of her alerts on her.
Yeah, my follow alert is from Arrival.
Yes, that's one of the best alien movies ever. I feel like it is so good. I love it, and especially the language. Like, and I keep telling my friend that I'm going to get a tattoo of like one of the symbols that they have.
Ah, that's cool. Yeah. I thought that was one of the better. Well, we talk a lot about aliens on this show, Jeff. That's one of my areas of interest. And I think that I agree with you. I think that's been one of the better movies that's been done in terms of like what you're like throwing out a thought project of like what we could actually encounter and how it could actually happen. I think that's a good one.
Yeah, and I think like the heptapods pretty much in that movie, like their concept of time is very interesting as well. Spread across that movie, it's just very interesting. Where it's not so much like a linear thing where it's just like this happens and then this. It's more like their language where it's a circle, and it's just like because a certain thing happens now, something else will happen later, and then a cycle continues. And what you learn from it is kind of up to you, that whole cycle of life kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now that's a proper introduction, right?
Yeah.
Right?
That's my alert.
Yeah. Amazing. I love that movie so much.
Yeah, you actually make me want to go do a binge on it, actually, because I've really seen it since it came out.
Yeah, because I was like, the first time I watched it, I'm like, oh, no, I need to get the DVD for this. And as soon as it got on the DVD, I'm like, yep, that's mine. I'm snatching it right up. I love it. Oh, it was so good.
A quick question for you, since you said you've talked about some horror movies, and I too love the horror genre. I've heard. What is your opinion? I think it's Halloween 3. Is that the Samhain one?
Well, the thing is for me, so I'm not really a big fan on slashers.
Okay.
So I've seen the original Halloween,
Okay.
and I think I saw the Halloween Kills or something like that
Mhm.
because one of our friends were just like, "Oh, let's go! It's gonna be the last Halloween," and I'm like, "No, it's not."
No, it's never going to be the last
Never
one.
is, yeah.
But we went to it anyway, and I'm like, "See, I told you."
Yeah, there's always going to be an next Halloween. Well, the one specifically I heard about this year, when Halloween came around, the holiday, obviously that movie always is going to get kind of brought up in the consciousness of everyone.
Yeah.
And this year I heard a lot of people say, so when I think I was in high school, I think me and Jenny were watching these in high school. We were kind of going through all of them in order. That was probably right before H2O came out. But anyway, I always remember no one liked the third one. I'm pretty sure it was the third one because it just completely changed the storyline.
Yeah.
But I've heard it's kind of gaining cult favor now, and people are like really getting behind that one because they say as a standalone movie, if you just don't think of it as a Halloween movie and you just watch it as a horror movie, that it's like really, really good. So that might be something I plan out for maybe next Halloween. Give that another chance after 20 years, 20 some odd years.
Right.
Well, that sounds interesting. I mean, kind of getting to talk about, and then you said you also discussed like D&D and tabletop gaming over there as well.
Yeah, definitely. And so I actually didn't get into D&D until a few years ago, actually, until maybe 2019, I feel like. So I've considered myself so fresh into D&D, but my friend introduced it to me, and there was a lot of obviously like darker elements to it where there's, like Curse of Strahd was a huge thing for me. I mean, it's one of the bigger things, especially for people who are like me, who are nerdy and like the darker side of things. So it's just like, oh, Crystal Straw, it's amazing. And it kind of got me thinking of creating my own realm, basically. And so I've been a DM for the past year or so, like a year and a half maybe. But I created my own pretty much nightmare realm. And it's kind of all about I guess so, like the players in the realm are trapped in this place because they were killed unjustly in the real life. And if they can make it through this realm and defeat the entity at the very end, they have a second chance at their life back.
Oh, wow.
So it's been a long campaign. It's been over a year. But I planned everything out, like, up to the finale. And I think I've had like maybe 4 or 5 character deaths, but that's kind of how it goes. But a lot of it actually deals with like dreams and nightmares because it is Nightmare Realm, and the whole thing of like them either wanting to stay in this realm because the entity is pulling them into the realm through these dreams and nightmares, or their character is strong-willed enough to push through that, defeat the enemies and make it out, So it's been pretty fun.
Well, not to give you anything else to do, but that sounds like it would be a really cool book too.
Yeah.
I actually kind of told my wife that too. I was just like, it does seem pretty cool.
I mean, I know you're trying to write like a book that has like 1 million pages in it, but to give you something else to do.
Yeah. And I mean, really, to kind of add to it is it's like I have my main series, but I actually do have other books that I have outlines for, and it just keeps going on. So
well, that's awesome. Well, we have the link up for the book, the book you wrote, the first book for the Lands of Ordia, Power of Heaven. Is there a way? I know it's a long one. Is there a way you can kind of give a short little introduction for it, so people can kind of see if it was something they would like to go buy?
Yeah, I guess I could just read the back of the book. Like that's always the thing that like this is kind of what it's about. If that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Sorry about that. All right. So, says, when Jarel and his friend Corvin discover a mysterious enchanted gem, they learn from an elven lord Sirvin that not only was it crafted by the Alumnar, the immortals of Ordia, but that there are two more with similar power. These stones are the key to protecting the earth against the oncoming darkness, as they equal the powers of all three immortals when they're combined. It is up to Jarel to find the other gems in order to restore peace and light in a world engulfed in strife and looming war. With a strong company assembled of various individual traits, Jarel and Corvin trek across Ordia in hopes of returning it to a home of safety and comfort. So that's kind of what the back of the book says.
Excellent. So if you're into fantasy, and that sounds like a good intro there to go check it out and pick it up if you got some time on your hands to tackle that. It sounds wonderful. I got a little bit of a look. I've one thing I have deciphered from this conversation is that I'm a little bit older than you. But I remember that does give me some like old vibes going back to when I played the first Final Fantasy game with like the crystals and the warriors and all that stuff. So definitely interested right off the bat. So yeah, excellent.
And we all like rock. We all like rocks around here, as I'm surrounded by them. So
that's true. We got a gemstone community. So
I mean, my wife, she's all about crystals and all that stuff too. So yep. And I guess like actually to kind of briefly add to it, in the second book too, there are gemstones in it. So very much an inspiration. So
yeah, Priestess Wonderland said, "I like rocks." We all like the rocks. Yes.
Yeah. I always tease my wife that it's just like, yeah, you got your magic rocks over there.
Oh yeah. I'm writing a whole book about magic rocks. These people are traversing a whole world looking for rocks.
Yep.
That sounds like our kind of book.
All right.
And Hoaxer said earlier that when you're done with all 5, you should put it into one actual big book and that he'll carry it around with him.
Yeah, that'll be a really, really big book.
To get like, one of those carts or something. Like carry it around in a shopping cart with you.
It'll fill up a whole backpack. Just one book.
Excellent. All right. So for all the people listening to us on YouTube and iHeartRadio and Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever or whenever you're listening to us in another time, in another place, we are going to say goodbye for the evening. So thank you for joining us. Make sure you check out the descriptions below for all the links to go find Jaxon. And we will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.